can't even get a figure out which way he's going.
What kind of car is it? We need to know something.
We're trying to ask her now. A Mazda Protege. What color was it? A burgundy Mazda Protege.
Get them going, Pam. I got 2 kids.
Okay.
That's a black guy, she said.
Okay.
Black male?
Yes, ma'am.
You know which way?
Do you know which way he went?
Daddy, ask her if she know which way he went towards.
Did he have a gun? Ask him, did he have a gun?
Okay. Wait till he comes back.
He's trying to get it out of her now.
Did he have any weapons, gun, anything?
Did he have a... Look, going towards Chester. Did he have a gun or a weapon, anything? Say he had a gun? Yeah. He's got a gun.
Got a gun.
Yes, ma'am. Hello?
Okay. We're getting them on the way.
Okay.
Give me your name.
Rick McLeod's my name. Do you need us to tell you anything from our yard or anything?
Okay, can you get a tag number out of her?
Daddy, see if you can get a tag.
It's hard to keep, have hope. I've after this long a time, I just don't feel like, it's just been so long, and I think if they were okay, then they would have been found by now. But the hardest part is just not knowing. And my heart just aches, and I miss them so much. I just can't express it, and it's just a tragedy. And I just pray and pray and pray that they'll come home safe.
Yeah.
That's the one place we wouldn't see us.
Yes, ma'am. There's a lady that come up that door, and some guy jumped into a red light with her car with her 2 kids in it, and he took off, and she got out of the car here at our house.
The call came from a house along Lockhart Highway in rural Union County near the entrance to John D. Long Lake.
And he's got the kids?
Yes, ma'am, in her car. And she's real hysterical, and I just decided I need to call the law and get them down here.
The woman was Susan Smith, who'd gone to the nearest house after she said she'd fled the man who took her car and children in the direction of Chester, South Carolina.
What kind of car is it? We need to know something.
We're trying to ask her now. A Mazda Protege. What color was it? A burgundy Mazda Protege.
Get them going, Pam. I got 2 kids.
Okay.
The dispatcher sent out 2 cars, one to the house and another down the highway in pursuit of the car.
Union 105.
105, go ahead.
Said it was a black male driving a burgundy Protege.
Affirmative, 105.
He had 2 juveniles with him.
105, from what I understood, these were small children. These are her children, and she jumped out of the car, and he took the car with the children, and he's headed toward Chester.
I'll get back to Then the sheriff, Howard Wells, heard about the call and quickly got a fix on the urgency of the case before him.
Union 100.
100, go ahead.
The victim and the suspect in this call The same family?
100. From what I gathered by the call, they are not. This is a stranger that had jumped in the lady's car at a red light, and she jumped out.
Simple.
We are in Phoenix this morning, but across the country from here, the kidnapping of two little boys, 3-year-old Michael Smith and his 14-month-old brother Alex, has gripped the town of Union, South Carolina. From the beginning, on October 25th, their mother, Susan, has maintained that she was the victim of a carjack, that her sons were caught in the middle. Right now, we want to go to Union to get the story firsthand from Susan Smith and her husband, David. Susan, how are you doing this morning?
Doing okay. Very little sleep last night, but I'm okay.
There was some news yesterday and some promising leads in this case. How are you coping with the disappointment of the news from yesterday?
I was running around my house yesterday morning all excited. I really thought that they had really found something that was, I really thought they had found one of my children, and when I got to the courthouse and found out that the lead had disintegrated or there was nothing there, I was very devastated, very disappointed. Got my hopes up and was let down, but I haven't given up hope. That was maybe one of many disappointments, but maybe the next going to be right.
David, where do you think your children are?
I have no idea.
Do you hold out hope that they're still alive?
Yes, we both do, very strongly.
This is going to be a little bit difficult to talk about, but even folks in Union wonder about the both of you. They wonder if all of the truth of this story has been told. Susan, what do you say to that?
I say that on my behalf, the truth has been told. I know right here what the truth is. I can see from their side why they have to do the things they have to do. But the Lord and myself both know the truth. I did not have anything to do with the abduction of my children. I don't think any parent could love their children any more than I do, and I'd never even think about ever doing anything that would harm them. And yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Susan.
I was just going to say it's very painful to have the finger pointed at you when it's your children involved.
David, this is as equally a difficult question. Are you satisfied that that's true?
That what's true?
That Susan has told everything she knows?
Yes. I believe my wife totally.
Susan, we're led to believe that investigators spent quite a bit of time at your place yesterday. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
And what do you think they were looking for?
I have no idea. I granted them permission to search my house under the impression that was one of the normalities of the investigation. As far as what they were looking for, what they took, I have no knowledge of that.
David, the question that arises in people who have been following this so closely, and certainly you have to know how much emotion that this has generated across the country, is why someone who would be interested in carjacking or stealing a car would want to continue to take a couple of little kids with them. Have you been able to fathom that, or could you think of why someone would want to kidnap a couple of little kids unless there was some ransom or something involved?
No, I have no idea why the suspect why he even took the children and why he has not released them yet. We have no knowledge whatsoever.
Susan, what do you think?
I think it takes a very sick and emotionally unstable person to be able to take two beautiful children like that, to be able to keep them from their parents, to keep them from where they do belong. I can't imagine why anybody would want to do such a thing as what has happened.
David, what message do you have for folks around the country who are watching right now?
That the American people, that this nation, that they don't give up on Michael and Alex, that they continue to search for the vehicle, for the children, or for the suspect himself, and that they keep our family, me and my wife and our family, but especially Michael and Alex, in their prayers, and keep searching until they are found.
David and Susan, we thank you so much for your time this morning.
You're very welcome.
Paula?
It is just about 16 minutes after the hour.
I'm doing okay. How are you this morning?
Pretty good, thank you. Well, thank you too.
Yeah, you're welcome. Doing okay. Very little sleep last night, but I'm okay. I was running around my house yesterday morning all excited. I really thought that they had really found something that was, I really thought they had found one of my children, and when I got to the courthouse and found out that the lead had disintegrated or when there was nothing there, I was very devastated, very disappointed. Got my hopes up and was let down, but I haven't given up hope. You know, that was maybe one of many disappointments, but maybe the next gonna be right.
I have no idea. Yes, we both do very strongly.
I say that on my behalf, the truth has been told. I know right here what the truth is. I can see from their side why they have to do the things they have to do. But the Lord and myself both know the truth. I did not have anything to do with the abduction of my children. I don't think any parent could love their children any more than I do, and I'd never even think about ever doing anything that would harm them. And yes, go ahead. I was just going to say it's very painful to have the finger pointed at you when it's your children involved.
But what's true? Yes, I believe my wife totally.
Yes, sir. I have no idea. I granted them permission to search my house under the impression that was one of the normalities of the investigation. As far as what they were looking for, what they took, I have no knowledge of that.
No, I have no idea why the suspect why he even took the children and why he has not released them yet. We have no knowledge whatsoever.
I think it takes a very sick and emotionally unstable person to be able to take two beautiful children like that, to be able to keep them from their parents, to keep them from where they do belong. I can't imagine why anybody would want to do such a thing as what has happened.
That the American people, that this nation, that they don't give up on Michael and Alex, that they continue to search for the vehicle, for the children, or for the suspect himself, and that they keep our family, me and my wife and our family, but especially Michael and Alex, in their prayers, and keep searching until they are found.
You're very welcome. Thank you. You're very welcome.
Done. Clear.
Clear.
Yes, sir, the people are really in a state of shock here in our community from this tragedy, and they're accepting it very well. At the present time, they're going all out to do everything possible that they possibly can to help come up to find some kind of clue that might help the investigators during the investigation. No, I do not. I do not feel like that they're involved in it whatsoever. And I don't think our residents in our community feel like they are either.
Well, about 17 or 18 years ago, Harry, there was an accident that killed 5 children at one of our local intersections here, and I suppose as far as the tragedy is concerned, that was the worst tragedy up to this point. Well, of course, we're a small newspaper, and national media does not come to a small town this often. We've tried to make our particular facilities available to most of the reporters that want to use them, and then of course we've had to supply information, supply uplinks for a lot of the national news networks.
Well, with all the business places and residents, they have placed yellow ribbons upon their doors, hoping for the return of the children real soon. And we've all have band ourselves together to have a 24 prayer vigil around the clock in support of the children and the family for their safe return.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael 3 and Alexander 14 months. The vehicle, a 1990 Mazda, driven by Smith, was located late Thursday afternoon in Lake John D. Long near Union. 2 bodies were found in the vehicle's back seat. Identities are pending an autopsy. Charges against Smith will be signed by Union County Sheriff Howard Wells. 16th Circuit Solicitor Thomas Pope said Thursday a bond hearing will be held at 10 a.m. at the Moss Justice Center in York before Circuit Judge Henry Floyd. Smith is incarcerated at an undisclosed location.
Did she confess? Did she tell you where the car was, Sheriff?
Aside from the fact that the kids are dead, what disturbs you most about this?
I guess that a mother could sit there and lie to a nation, and that she could plead for the safety of her children, knowing that she has done something as heinous as this. I just can't comprehend that.
To do it with as much apparent sincerity and to appear so distraught, do you think there's any possibility she might be disturbed in some way?
I don't think so. I guess I get very angry when I hear not that this will be the defense that they will take, but I guess I get very angry when I hear people say, oh, we're going to go for the insanity plea. People know what they're doing. I think once in a great while there might be a rage of, where you really might not know what you're doing. But I think for the most part, people know what they're doing. And
you don't think she's insane?
I don't think she's insane, no. No.
Why then do you think, or how could she do something like this?
I guess if I could see her, that would be the one question I would ask her. Why? Or how? How could you kill your own children? I have children. I get angry at them just like any other parent, but not angry enough to where I would kill them. I don't understand, especially toddlers. I mean, what have they done wrong? Except to ask for some food and to be changed and loved.
Do you think she may have done this solely to hurt her husband?
Well, if she has, then she's hurt far more than her husband. She's hurt her husband, her extended family. I feel she's even hurt a nation by going on camera and pleading that she's hurt a nation too. because people have been outpouring their love, their time. I understand from my brother that they've received money from across the nation for people trying to help them, you know, set up a fund or a reward fund or something. So whatever her motive, she's hurt far more than whoever she thought she was going to hurt.
There's a haze over Union, South Carolina today. For many who live here, a haze of bitter disbelief.
I just don't understand. I just don't understand.
What April Vincent doesn't understand is how her former high school classmate, 23-year-old Susan Smith, could be accused of killing her own children. Even harder to understand is how Susan Smith stuck to her story for 9 days that a carjacker drove off with her kids, when now authorities say she has confessed to driving her very own children into this lake.
It just hurts.
Today, children were clinging to their mothers. Have you explained to him what the story is now and what she's accused of? Some things are better left unsaid.
Yeah.
But what's being said in the African American community is this.
Blaming on the black man is a shame. I mean, to fabricate a whole picture and everything. The picture's nationwide.
Carl Long says he was questioned by police last week.
They made me feel kind of bad coming, picking me up off my job early in the morning.
There is lots of tension.
Racial tension?
Yes.
I'm not really angry. I'm hurt.
A distraught and disturbed mother is accused of rolling her car into a lake, drowning her 2 young boys. It has become a dangerous world out there for children. 1 out of 10 homicides in this country involve children who are abused to death. And who is hurting and killing these kids may surprise you.
The studies indicate that a profile would be a female under 25 with income other than wages and extra stressors in her life.
She may be on welfare or getting financial help from her parents. Her self-esteem is often low. Studies suggest female parents are 10 to 1 more likely to be abusers than men. And whether you agree with this or not, the experts say one of the most common forms of abuse is spanking.
But the parents who hit their kids, what they teach that when they're mad, what they teach their kids to do is that they teach them, if you're mad, go hit somebody.
Dean Shelton is a single father and has vowed not to spank, but it's happened.
We were at a store and my brother was bugging me, and I guess he got really mad at it, and he just turned my brother around out. Bam.
Lately, all we've heard is that spanking is wrong. But we found a child expert at UNM who says spanking may be acceptable if the child has put himself in a dangerous situation and the parent really wants to make a point.
And the message is unsafe things get serious consequences.
Would your colleagues agree with what you just told me?
Many of them. I mean, we have to be clear about what we're talking about on spanking. I mean, we're talking about open hand on a rear end.
Now, I grew up in the area when I was spanked, too. And I don't think it hurt me. In fact, I probably did me some good in some ways. But I think it's kind of a last resort sort of discipline.
Linda Rengel teaches parenting classes and says there are plenty of options to spanking.
We would put spanking way, way, way down on the list and put things higher on the list like logical consequences, natural consequences, doing some problem solving, listening reflectively, asking the child what he or she thinks could be done to solve the problem instead of just automatically spanking.
Susan Smith is probably the best-known case of a mother killing her children. She sent her 2 boys to the bottom of a lake locked in a car. For Stephanie Simmons and Norma Patrick Hall are 2 more mothers that police say confessed to killing their own children. But why?
This is the solution they come up to, and this is the only thing that they see that could be the answer.
Dr. Fricker deals with abuse cases and says stress plays a big role.
Could be the kind of problem that they're being faced with that moment. It could have something to do with their children, if they're having trouble with their children, or if someone's telling them that something can't work because of their child.
Police say they don't know why Stephanie Simmons says she killed her 2 children using a butcher knife and an axe late last year. But her lawyer says she was recently diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, a condition he says she was never treated for. Dr. Fricker says just like stress, many psychiatric problems, including depression, also play a role.
Because the more depressed they are, the fewer problem-solving abilities they have.
Dr. Fricker says there are often warning signs, but nothing is ever certain.
Lots of mothers out there have psychiatric problems, and lots of mothers are under stress, and lots of mothers aren't going to kill their children.
David Smith looked on as his wife Susan Smith entered a courtroom in York County, South Carolina for the first time since she was arrested for the murders of her 2 young sons.
Obviously, he's thinking there's a mental issue. We need to get it before these objective examiners and make a determination of whether or not there's an issue.
State Solicitor Tommy Pope wants Smith evaluated to see if she's competent to stand trial. He called on a psychiatrist to testify about why it's important to make the evaluation quickly. But Smith's attorney says it's premature to be determining Susan's mental state. He fears it could be used against her if the state seeks the death penalty.
She is, at this moment, very fragile. She is regressed. She is not able to protect herself.
They poured in from all corners of South Carolina. Some say they drove for hours to get here, and it took most of them at least an hour just to get inside, where they could pay their respects to this man, the father, standing by the single coffin that bears his 2 sons.
When we hugged the father, he just said, "Thank you for coming." He gave us a huge hug, and you can feel his sadness when he touched you. He's just so sad.
We were not allowed to take you inside, but 4 rooms, we are told, are filled with nothing but flowers from all over the country.
It's something I ain't never seen before. I mean, flowers, they're more than a flower shop.
But this is not the only place in Union attracting crowds. A mother carrying 1 baby in her womb leads another bearing flowers along the same path that carried 2 small boys to their deaths.
It's beautiful. It's beyond my imagination what happened here.
They come from all over South Carolina bearing flowers, prayers, and a sense of bewilderment as they stare at a cold, dark lake and imagine the horror.
Those babies floating in that car before they went under. Yes.
These 2 small boys, strapped in the back of their mother's car, as it plunges into the water, floats a little, rolls upside down and descends to the bottom.
We wonder if the babies hollered for their mother, if she heard anything, and how she could live with the fact of knowing those kids were in there alive.
As people continue to flock to this, the very spot where we're told the car went into the water with the 2 little boys in it, we're learning a little more about what might have been going through the accused killer's mind that night, the mother, Susan Smith. Sources are telling 7 News that in her confession, Susan Smith said she came here to commit suicide, that she was totally despondent that night about money, financial problems, about broken relationships. What we don't understand is, if that's true, why the children were the only ones to actually die.
It just seems so unfair that somebody could take such 2 beautiful children.
Right.
She was so good on television. Do you believe her now? Do you think that she could do this and then feel bad about it?
You don't believe anything that comes out of her mouth?
I don't believe anything that she said.
Susan Smith arrived shortly after 8:30 this morning. She looks heavier than the last time we saw her. She was dressed in a blouse and skirt. A few minutes later, her mother arrived, and then her ex-husband, David. On the other side of the courthouse, potential jurors were ushered in. Almost 2 hours later, questioning began. One of the few people allowed in Judge Howard's small courtroom to watch these proceedings is Barbara Benson, David Smith's mother. Her grandchildren died at the hands of Susan Smith. Earlier today, she told us how her son is holding up.
He's waiting for it to all be over with and trying to endure one day at a time. He wants to be here for his boys. He wants to represent them. He doesn't want people to forget that they're the reason that this whole trial happened and that their little lives were lost.
She also said her son doesn't care how long the trial takes. He simply wants a specific ending.
David wants Susan to get the death penalty, and I don't think he really cares how that happens.
When Susan Smith arrived at the courthouse this morning, Dr. Donald Morgan says she was in a deep and severe depression. Under oath this afternoon, the state's chief psychiatrist, who has examined Smith several times, testified she could stand trial, but he recommended she not be allowed to testify in her own behalf because she would ask for the death penalty. In Dr. Morgan's words, she feels she deserves punishment, and her desire would be not to continue living in prison. She has a fantasy of being reunited with her children. As Smith left the courthouse today, attorneys for both sides worked to spin control on the courthouse lawn.
Does your client want to die?
Well, I'm not going to say anything more than the testimony. The testimony by Dr. Morgan today, who is the state, I don't mean Mr. Pope's, but the state of South Carolina's chief forensic psychiatrist, was heard by everybody. As far as any major depression, which Dr. Morgan talked about extensively, that was a major depression that came on post-arrest.
Someone else was also talking today. Barbara Benson, David Smith's mother. She spent her day in the courtroom with her son and keeping her eye on her former daughter-in-law, the person who killed her grandchildren. She seemed somewhat irritated that Smith was dressed so nicely and looked so calm, but said she was not surprised.
Attorneys always tell their clients to dress nicely for court. I noticed, too, that her face is really well scrubbed and no makeup, which is very unlike Susan.
The judge is expected to rule on the mental competence of Susan Smith tomorrow morning.
That decaf judge? No, high test.
Coffee in hand, Judge William Howard was ready to begin another day looking for a jury. With so much at stake, no one involved in this process, including Susan Smith, wants to rush things. Inside the courtroom, the questions were much the same as yesterday, but some of the answers were different. One man who was chosen asked if he wanted to serve on this jury. He replied, "You want my honest answer? I'd rather not." A woman who was excused said execution was wrong, no matter what the crime. Another woman feared she would have a nervous breakdown if forced to sit through a trial. Curiosity seekers are still drawn to Union. This couple, Lee and Shirley Brown of Spartanburg, told me they're not sure if Smith can get a fair trial in her hometown. They believe people here think life in prison is not an option. Do you think a jury here will give her the death penalty?
Probably. Yes, I think they would. I sure do.
But others aren't so quick to pass judgment on the jury. Would you want to be one of the people who makes the decision whether she lives or dies?
No.
If you were one of those people, what would your decision be?
I would say life in jail instead of death, because that would give her so much time to think about what she's done. I think that'd be the worst punishment for her. I think death's too easy.
Susan Smith's murder trial seemed to get off to a slow start. On Monday, the judge hadn't even decided if the young mother who confessed to drowning her sons was mentally fit to stand trial. But the pace picked up, and by lunchtime today, 12 jurors had been seated to hear opening arguments.
It's gone a lot faster than anybody expected.
The makeup of the jury includes 5 white men, 4 black men, 2 white females, and 1 black woman.
Every juror that we sat today or any other day that is sitting on this jury now has said they can be fair and impartial and that they'd want to hear both sides and they would not make up their mind.
State Solicitor Tommy Pope is seeking the death penalty in this case. For him to get it, that means all 12 jurors must agree that Susan Smith should die for her crimes.
I think they are agonizing with the thought that they may be in some way obligating themselves to vote for the death penalty for this woman.
During the selection process, some of the jurors who were chosen to serve said they had concerns about being able to give the death penalty.
All we have and all we're armed with is the facts in this case and the evidence that we have to present. And I feel confident in the facts and evidence we have in going forward.
Early on in this case, the prosecutor had expressed concerns about drawing a jury from Smith's hometown, and many potential jurors were dismissed because they testified they opposed capital punishment. However, lawyers on both sides seem pleased today with what they've managed to accomplish in a week. Prosecutors began this morning by taking the court back to the night of October 25th, when Susan Smith first reported her children had been taken by a carjacker.
I would like to say to whoever has my children that they please I mean, please bring them home.
Prosecutor Tommy Pope called Sheriff Howard Wells to the stand. Now, Wells was the first to interview Smith after she reported her children had been kidnapped. He testified that Smith appeared to be upset that night. He said there were inconsistencies in her story from the start, but Wells and SLED officers did not become suspicious until the next day, when Smith had difficulty coming up with a composite sketch of the alleged carjacker.
I think that the idea that she is less than human or satanic or just sort of the embodiment of evil is less credible in her own community.
Later on today, the state is expected to try to get Smith's handwritten confession admitted into evidence. In it, she writes, "I dropped to my lowest when I allowed my children to go down that ramp into the water without me."
I think we'll be able to go forward in a timely fashion and give a good accounting of the system here in South Carolina and hopefully have justice achieved.
Prosecutors will also be trying to get a video reenactment of the crime admitted so they can show the jury just how Smith rolled her car into the lake with her 2 young sons strapped inside.
Area filled with water, and thoughts turn to those little boys who just last
Every day.
Susan Smith was described as both evil and childlike. 2 personalities emerged as attorneys on opposite sides laid out opening statements.
I'm afraid that whoever has them, that the Lord would let him realize that they are missed and loved more than any children in this world.
Jurors saw videotapes of Smith begging for her children's safe return. Prosecutors say Smith lied to the country for 9 days.
Regardless of what they choose to put in, we have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's what we intend to do.
The state continued by telling the jury that Smith was evil and acted with malice.
They set it to a standard of evilness, and that's a high standard. An evil heart, an evil person.
Defense attorneys admitted that Smith lied, but they said she was a good mother who missed her precious children, and after leading a troubled life, she just snapped.
I mean, obviously she killed her children, so that was the, and a good mom does not kill her children. However, it's important in understanding why this happened to know what the relationship between this young woman and her children were.
The night Susan Smith drowned her children, she ran to this house, which is not far from John D. Long Lake. Inside, she told the McLeod family that her 2 young sons had been abducted by a carjacker. They say she was very upset, and they believed her. When Smith finally did confess, she told Sheriff Howard Wells to pray with her. Then she asked for his gun because she wanted to die. Just as testimony was wrapping up for the day, the Union County Courthouse got a bomb threat and the entire building had to evacuate.
It was not. Everything was calm. No panic at all.
As Susan Smith was led into the side door of the Union County Courthouse, crowds of spectators began lining up on the front steps.
How it works. Never been to a trial before. It's been #1, so just curious.
It hits home being here and seeing everything once you've seen it on the news and then being here in person.
Prosecutor Tommy Pope led opening statements, saying for 9 days in the fall of 1994, Susan Smith looked this country in the eye and lied. The state told the jury that Smith was not insane the night she drowned her children in the lake. Instead, Pope described a selfish woman who was trying to win the affections of an ex-lover who didn't want children.
We want the jury to remember, and what everyone needs to remember, that the issue is Susan Smith's mental state on October 25th, the night that Michael and Alex were killed.
Defense attorney Judy Clark said Susan Smith's crimes were a failed suicide, that the defendant wanted to go down that ramp with her children. Clark told the jury that Smith tried to cope with a failing life and snapped.
Susan, I think, hopes that some true picture comes out.
It's clear from the start the jury will get to hear about 2 different Susan Smiths. The defense says the defendant is a good mother whose troubled life and desire to die led her to do a desperate act. But prosecutors say Smith is selfish, wanted attention, and knew exactly what she was doing when she murdered her children.
Our lives have been torn apart by this tragic event.
As Susan Smith begged for her children's safe return, the sheriff's department was already targeting her as a prime suspect.
How much they are wanted back home, how much we love them, we miss them,
Sheriff Howard Wells took the stand today, telling the court he doubted Smith's story from the beginning. And when no new leads turned up after 9 days of searching, he says he lied to Smith to get her to tell the truth.
We felt the confession was solid from the get-go. And on the other hand, it is a big deal. That was a big part of our case. If it would have been excluded, we'd have been in a world of hurt.
Smith broke down, saying, "My children are not all right," and then gave the sheriff a handwritten confession, which will be vital to the state's case.
And I don't know if they could proceed without the confession and all the evidence that they obtained after the confession.
At the end of proceedings today, a juror was dismissed for lying to the court about the fact she had a criminal record for credit card fraud. She was escorted away, but lawyers are confident the trial will remain on schedule, even though there is only one alternate juror left. Susan Smith is just 23 years old, but according to defense witnesses, she's had a death wish since childhood. Defense lawyer David Bruck paraded doctors, social workers, and teachers who told the jury about Smith's family history of abuse, alcoholism, and suicide.
I think the important thing to do is to present the truth, and that's what we did.
Perhaps the most compelling testimony came from Dr. Seymour Halleck. He said that Smith suffered from an untreated form of depression, that if it had been treated, it may have saved her children's lives.
This is a very troubled young girl who came from a very troubled background, a lot of suicide in the family, depression, she's been abused by men, manipulated by men. She doesn't deserve the death penalty.
Prosecutors fired back during cross-examination, asking the defense witness if he believes Smith was criminally responsible. Pope is especially angry about Dr. Halleck's testimony that he doesn't think that Smith remembers if her children were in the car when she let it roll into the lake.
Even if you believe their theory on suicide, that as I have said several times with the doctor, if she intends to commit suicide, I can't suicide you. I would have to kill you to take you with me, and that's what she did.
Defense lawyers are trying to convince the jury that Susan Smith, while not insane, is emotionally troubled. They're hoping the jury will evoke some sympathy and spare her life. But the prosecution says Susan Smith must be held responsible for her actions. In Union, South Carolina, Sharon Crowley, Channel 5, Eyewitness News, Primetime. David Smith gripped hearts around the country last fall as many watched a young father bury his sons.
It was so pitiful. I will come back. I'm not coming back. We won't.
Compassion returned today as Susan Smith's ex-husband took the stand, talking about how much he misses playing with Alex and Michael. David cried as he told the jury that all his hopes and dreams had come to an end that day, the day his wife confessed to drowning their boys in John D. Long Lake.
When it ripped him apart, took everything away from him. He's got nothing left.
David Smith also told the jury about a turbulent 3-year marriage to the defendant. The couple married when Susan was already pregnant with their first child. Smith testified that both he and Susan had affairs outside the marriage. Susan and David broke up and got back together several times during their marriage. In one instance, they moved to this home here on Tony Road just outside of Union. David testified it was a chance to start over.
It was just a father who loved his 2 sons and misses them. And I mean, that's just 2 of the jurors were crying, several of the spectators, including press members, were crying, and Susan Smith was sobbing at her table. So
David Smith clearly moved the jury. Prosecutors are hoping the tearful testimony will secure a sentence of death for Susan Smith. An FBI agent says Susan Smith covered her ears and ran as her children sunk to the bottom of John D. Long Lake. Agent Carol Allison talked with Smith the night she confessed, testimony that has been taxing on some family members.
After hearing about those babies in the lake, as far as I'm concerned, they can execute them.
And this is so hard, listening to all these details again and reliving the horror of the boys losing their lives. And
before the state rested its case, Smith's ex-lover Tom Finley took the stand. Finley was to provide the jury with a motive. Prosecutors read his Dear John letter to Susan. In it, he tells her he doesn't want children.
and what the prosecutor has to do is take 12 very normal, caring, loving people and convince them to kill somebody.
Perhaps the most compelling testimony came yesterday when a diver who'd found Susan Smith's car submerged here at John D. Long Lake broke down on the stand as he recalled finding the car and seeing a child's small hand pressed against the window.
No one can discount the deaths of those children, and we wouldn't try to do that.
The defense began its case by calling some of the state's witnesses to the stand. Legal analysts say the defense is trying to put a buffer between the state's closing testimony and deliberations. They say this is not a case of guilt or innocence, but about whether Smith should live or die. Dr. Seymour Halleck traced the troubled life of Susan Smith during testimony for the defense today. Halleck diagnosed Smith with a depressive disorder, saying if she was adequately treated with Prozac, the deaths of her children would never have happened.
We just got to get them home. That's just where they belong, with their mama and daddy.
Dr. Halleck is a forensic psychiatrist who studied Smith's background. He discovered her parents had an abusive relationship that ended when her father committed suicide. Her mother remarried, and after that, Smith's stepfather admitted to having sex with his 15-year-old stepdaughter.
Susan, as I've told you all along, is a very, very hard person to read. She usually seems like she's doing fine, and sometimes she is doing okay, and sometimes she's not doing okay at all. But
defense witnesses testified that Susan Smith may have tried to end her life as early as age 13, and then again here at Foster Park at age 18. A psychiatrist testified that she took an overdose of something they believe was aspirin, but stopped herself in time.
But the issue is, when Susan Smith was remorseful, why is she remorseful? Is she remorseful because of Michael and Alex? Or is she remorseful because now everything she had laid out, everything she had done, had fallen apart?
Halleck says Smith was deep in despair the night she drowned her children, saying she was crying and felt alone. And in his opinion, she had planned to kill herself that night. But somehow at the last minute, he says self-preservation instincts took over. And he says Smith got out of the car, leaving her young sons inside to die.
Why is this light?
These home videotapes were taken during happy times with Susan and her children. The jury saw these tapes and others today, showing Smith as a good mother, something the defense team hopes the jury will remember going into deliberations.
what this really was a person of great human frailty who snapped at a point when most people in their lives would have been able to bend.
Defense lawyers began fighting to save Smith's life this morning after the state rested, but not before prosecutors had a chance to show the jury crime scene photographs that depicted Alex and Michael as they were pulled out of John D. Long Lake.
It was just heartbreaking.
The jury was also allowed to see reenactment videotape showing what Michael and Alex saw as the car sunk.
I think as far as emotional impact on everybody involved, including the jury, the participants, I think it was an extremely emotionally draining.
An expert witness for the defense also outlined Susan's troubled background, which included incest, abuse, and suicide attempts. And Susan's older brother testified, saying sentencing his sister to death would add more hurt to a family that's been devastated already. You're watching what Michael and Alex Smith saw as they sunk into John D. Long Lake, trapped inside their mother's car. The children were strapped into car seats in the back seat. It took 6 minutes for the Mazda Protege to sink.
That she had 5 minutes while that car floated on the top of John D. Long Lake to swim out to it, to go get help, to do something. At some point she decided not to kill herself and the kids, or kill herself. Apparently she was willing to let the kids die, and did nothing to stop it.
Prosecutors wanted the jury to see the entire reenactment videotape. They also called expert witnesses to the stand to talk about how long it took the children to die.
But this is such a tragedy, such a horrible case. And the one, I think both sides agree on that. The one thing we differ on is we say there's a choice in it.
The dramatic video came after the jury spent the day listening to gut-wrenching testimony from David Smith. Smith cried on the stand as he talked about playing with the boys and seeing them just 1 week before they died.
It was so pitiful. I won't come back.
Susan Smith also wept during her former husband's testimony. Defense attorney David Bruck decided not to cross-examine him.
She was just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, and I just held, she just collapsed into my arms. It was just very, she was, and...
What did she say?
Were you there when...
The state is hoping that tearful testimony and dramatic pictures will convince the jury to call for death. After a little more than 2 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict for Susan Smith. The verdict, while disappointing to the defense, was not unexpected.
Susan has been willing to plead guilty for months, so certainly the verdict was no surprise.
But it was still hard to take for Susan Smith's mother.
it's just hard to hear, even though I think they knew that this was going to come, and they had accepted it a long time ago, or at least had to accept it. But I think it was hard for her mother and her brother and her, her family.
Crowds of spectators and courtroom observers have watched this trial closely. They've come to see a mother who confessed to drowning her children. Like the defense team, most were not surprised by the jury's decision.
I have no reason in my heart to believe that she tried to kill herself.
I kind of feel like the tide has turned against, the public tide has turned against the death penalty in this case.
Prosecutor Tommy Pope is seeking the death penalty. During closing arguments, Pope brought Smith to tears as he asked the jury to remember Alex and Michael screaming as they sunk into the lake.
I think we're glad to have this stage done and to look forward to the next stage. I think at some points in the first stage we felt like we were fighting the second stage, but I'm just ready for us to get forward and put up the evidence we have in aggravation at this point.
Susan Smith was quickly escorted out of the Union County Courthouse until the penalty phase of this trial begins. Her former husband, David Smith, clearly sees the jury's verdict as a victory for his sons. Susan Smith's life rests in the hands of a jury. Today again they listened as the prosecution described Alex and Michael laying in a watery tomb for 9 days while their mother lied.
And I pray that whoever has them, that the Lord would let him realize that they are missed and loved more than any children in this world.
During closing arguments, Tommy Pope urged the jury to look again at videotapes of Susan Smith's deceitfulness as she begged for her children's return. He told the jury that Smith had a choice, and she chose to murder her children.
This particular case transcends just Michael and Alex. It speaks to how we're going to treat a crime like this and what we're going to tolerate in the treatment of children or the treatment of any victims.
Defense attorney David Brock has all along portrayed the murders as a failed suicide attempt, saying after years of abuse, Smith just snapped, and punishing her with death would be adding to this tragedy.
I hope I'll be able to suggest to the jury some reasons why the death penalty is not the best thing to do.
WBCU boasts its country music format, but for an hour every morning, gospel music takes center stage. And it's on that program that this song was heard by the people of Union. The cassette is called A Letter to Susan Smith, and what it actually is a recording of the song There Is a River. Rick Parr sings it. He also narrates his thoughts to Susan Smith in between verses.
Susan, during times of severe depression and when you feel like you can't go on, there is hope.
I'm trying to tell Susan that she needs to not think about suicide and not think about doing anything that would jeopardize her not going to the electric chair.
WBCU is the only radio station in this small town of Union, and as you can imagine, already dozens of people have already heard the song about Susan Smith.
The song didn't bother me. I just thought it was pretty. I love that song, and then what he says is okay.
A Letter to Susan Smith. One man's attempt to give this convicted murderer hope at a time when she's facing life or death.
Susan Smith's junior high school guidance counselor says as a teenager, he thought she was depressed. Billy Shaw testified that Smith came to visit him a number of times, and in one incident told him she had taken aspirin, enough that Shaw thought it was a cry for help.
Susan, as I've told you all along, is a very, very hard person to read. She usually seems like she's doing fine, and sometimes she is doing okay, and sometimes she's not doing okay at all. But
defense attorney David Brock called Shaw to the stand to try to show the jury that Smith attempted suicide as a teenager and had a troubled childhood. But on cross-examination, State Solicitor Tommy Pope tried to downplay visits to the counselor and the apparent suicide attempts, asking Shaw if he had ever seen Susan try to take her life. Shaw said he had not.
And that what she does is commits these acts or pretends to commit these acts to draw attention in order to gain feedback or sympathy, be it the teachers at 13, the boyfriends at 18, or Tom Finley currently. That's why I think she makes these particular gestures.
However, defense lawyers are relying on counselors and other social workers to support their case that when Susan Smith killed her children, it was a failed attempt to take her own life.
Exactly was.
Susan Smith's life hangs in the hands of the jury.
We just got to get them home. That's just where they belong, with their mama and daddy.
As jurors decide her punishment, prosecutors say again they will show Smith lying on television.
I have prayed every day. There's not 1 minute that goes by that I don't think about these boys.
This time around, they say they want the jury to get to know Michael and Alex Smith. To do that, they'll be calling the boy's father to the stand to tell the jury how much he misses his sons.
And it goes from guilt to penalty. And so it's easy for you to think out what that would include and why this crime should be a death penalty crime or not be a death penalty crime, and that's what we'd be moving toward.
Defense lawyers say giving Smith a death sentence is equivalent to saying Smith did not love her children. David Bruck promised to bring back witnesses who will talk more about Smith's troubled past of incest, abuse, and attempted suicide.
It is a terrible tragedy, and I don't, it's difficult.
The judges decided not to allow some of the most gruesome crime scene photos to be admitted. The prosecutors had been fighting to get them in, hoping to sway the jury, but the judge decided today it might prejudice the jury instead.
There's nothing like the visual image instead of an abstract discussion. The stills of those kids coming out of the water upside down in the seat of their car would have a visual impact that will stay with these jurors the rest of their lives.
Opening statements were delayed for several hours this morning after a juror admitted to talking with the children's grandmother. The judge ruled the trial would continue because the juror could still be fair and impartial.
It was innocent.
As they tried to convince the jury to punish Susan Smith with death, prosecutors argued that actions speak louder than words.
Instead of just focusing on poor Susan's life and everything that's been hard for her, look at what she really did during those 9 days.
A judge will be allowing some photographs from the crime scene to be admitted, but the most gruesome, the ones showing Alex and Michael after they spent 9 days in John D. Long Lake, were ruled out.
And I think that we've become numb, that we feel like, well, we need the most horrible of pictures, but I think that there will still be an effective picture painted, and that's the whole issue. We just, not to scare the jury, not to shock the jury, but just to show them what Susan Smith did.
I would like to say to whoever has my children that they please bring them home.
The state will also try to use the defendant's own words against her as they replay videotapes of her lying on television.
I can't express how much they are wanted back home, how much we love them, we miss them.
They also plan to call David Smith to the stand to testify, hoping that will shift the focus of this case to Alex and Michael.
You don't simply judge somebody by what they did in 1 hour of their life. Obviously, that's the crime, and it's terribly important, but it's not the whole story.
During opening statements, defense attorney David Bruck asked the jury to show mercy. When the defense gets its turn, they'll be trying to show the jury that while Susan Smith made deadly mistakes, she does not deserve to die. Susan Smith's judgment day came swiftly. A jury took pity on the 23-year-old mother who confessed to drowning her children. Others did not.
Well, I felt like that if Susan had death, everybody would have to live with that decision. And me personally, I couldn't live with it.
During closing arguments, defense attorney David Bruck had begged the jury to show mercy on his client. He reminded them of her troubled childhood, which included incest, abuse, and several suicide attempts.
I told her I thought she was going to be okay. I meant okay in the years to come, and she looked at me sort of quizzically like, oh yeah?
Bruck's strategy was to convince the jury that the murders of Michael and Alex were a failed attempt to end her own life.
Me and my family, of course, are disappointed that the death penalty wasn't the verdict, but
David Smith wanted the death penalty for his ex-wife. Smith was a key witness for the state. He cried on the stand when he told the jury about the last time he saw his young sons alive.
It was the most difficult thing I've had to do, I guess, since I buried Michael and Alex. I didn't enjoy it one bit. It hurt. It brought back some memories that I guess since the burial I have put aside.
There's nothing that can do justice for the situation that happened to Michael and Alex. But again, I respect the jury's verdict.
A life sentence was also a blow to the prosecution. State Solicitor Tommy Pope aggressively pursued the death penalty, saying Smith was selfish and manipulating. Smith will return to an isolated cell at a correctional facility outside of Union. She's still under a suicide watch, as the woman given life still wants to die.
The jury, again, we respect that they took the testimony among themselves and they came back with the verdict of life, and so they returned the verdict they thought was justice.
Now Smith will spend at least the next 30 years in prison, and for the time being she'll be in a cell alone on a suicide watch, as the woman given life still wants to die.
I have to feel sorry for her because she had to be something wrong with her to do what she did, because their lives are going to go on, the ones that's left behind. She's the one that doesn't have a life anymore, but it's sad that innocent children paid the price for her.
Thanks for the comment. Little has changed at the Union Farmers Market in the last 30 years.
There ain't no squash around nowhere.
Even with a high-profile murder trial 3 blocks away, life as folks have known it here for years goes on.
I'll check with you next week. Thank you.
Union is a town pursuing normalcy, and residents say the jury in the Smith case has helped.
Well, I think the whole community is happy over this. They didn't want to see her go to the electric chair.
This community, believe it or not, they are very concerned about each other, and they didn't want any more hurt on that family than was coming.
Townsfolk knew Susan Smith as a cheerful young cashier at Union's busiest grocery store. Their stake in the verdict was personal.
Well, she was real nice and friendly, you know, and she was very outgoing. I enjoyed talking to her. I'm relieved that all of this is over, and that the family don't have to sit and wait for them to call them and say, well, hey, Susan will be put in an electric chair tomorrow.
Even some of those residents who had wanted Smith executed now say they can live with the jury's decision.
I would have given her the death penalty. I guess now that it's over with, they can see how the jury decided, and how it would make them feel a little bit better not to give her the death penalty or anything.
It's good that it's over with, that we'll get back to normal now and everybody can start over.
Residents say the first sign of that will be the removal of this temporary media scaffolding, which has clogged the main street outside the courthouse square for the last 3 weeks. Residents say once it's gone, perhaps Union can start to return to normal. But they say after the Smith trial, their town will never be the same. In Union, South Carolina, Doug Richards, Eyewitness News.
Not reach a verdict. Constance.
Police here in New York have arrested 38 thugs described as mobster wannabes. Their alleged crimes included holding up truck drivers and warning them to tell the police that, quote, black guys did it. This is just the latest in a string of cases around the country in which whites have attempted to blame imaginary blacks for a crime. In every case, the hoax can have many real victims, as Dana King reports in tonight's Eye on America.
All the things going on in the world now, I mean, it's just crazy.
Comedian Paul Mooney thinks whites blaming blacks for murders is getting so common, they ought to have a toll-free number.
Hello, blame a nigger. I'm on the freeway. I just killed an entire family. I can't go to jail. I have a life. I'm white. Help me, blame a nigger. Send a nigger over with the bad drunk driving. I got one right here. I'll send him right over. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Sometimes people have to make fun of things that hurt this much. Author Shelby Steele.
It hurts black people. It continues to mire us in feelings of doubt and shame that we do not deserve.
I would like to say to whoever has my children.
According to Steele, Susan Smith's invention of a black criminal has a painful logic.
There is, again, tragically, this association between blackness and evil that she knew, at least on a subconscious level, and she knew other people would also have that same association and that it would make her story more believable.
Henry Louis Gates of Harvard.
Maybe it should be overlooked, the fact that she named a black man, and we can all move on to bigger and better things.
No, it can be overlooked because it's part of a consistent historical pattern. I mean, blacks have been used as scapegoats in this country from the first day that we got here.
And it still goes on. 1989, the Boston police tore the black community apart, looking for the alleged murderer of Charles Stewart's wife. Stewart drowned himself when his alibi fell apart. 1992 in Milwaukee, Jesse Anderson told police the alleged black killer of his wife left this hat and knife behind. It didn't wash.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Jesse Anderson, guilty of first degree.
Susan Smith's decision to play the race card is no surprise in a society that tolerates racism, says civil rights attorney Morris Dees.
She was a white woman who has this fear of black men that may have been engendered by Bush's Willie Horton ad, or the activities of the Ku Klux Klan, or politicians.
Or television, with its nightly parade of young black men in handcuffs. Whites commit the majority of crimes, but the stereotype of the black criminal has some basis in fact. Blacks make up a disproportionate part of prison populations and commit nearly half of all violent crimes. But most of those crimes are not committed against white people. According to recent government statistics, while 36% of the robberies were black on white, only 6% of the murders and 9% of all rapes were committed by blacks against whites.
My name is Tawana Brawley. I'm not a liar and I'm not crazy.
Crime is so racially charged in this country that many blacks and whites were prepared to believe Tawana Brawley, a young black girl who claimed she was gang raped by racist white men.
It's the flip side of the same coin. You take available stereotypes and you draw upon them to justify one thing or another.
The stereotype of violent young blacks makes it easier for whites to invent black villains. The irony is that young black males are now the most likely victims of crime in America, both real and imagined. I'm Dana King in New York for Eye on America.
And that's part of our world tonight.